Hello guys, let's study something regarding the autonomic nervous system pharma. So before going to that, we have to revise some of the anatomy of the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is divided into two classes: the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So we all know that the autonomic nervous system is actually derived from the brain and the spinal cord itself. So let me draw a brain, and this is the spinal cord. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic system are derived from different type of cranial nerves at different positions of the spinal cord and the brain. Uh, from the brain, from the cranial region and the sacral region, we have the formation of the parasympathetic nervous system, and these join with the ganglion and lead to postganglionic fibers. These join with the ganglion and lead to postganglionic fibers. So this is the red one is the parasympathetic, and the top one is actually the cranial outflow, and this one is the sacral outflow. Sacral, we should remember that these are derived from the S2, S3 and S4 nerves, and from the cranial we should remember that it is from the nerves, the cranial nerves 3, 7, 9 and 10. Okay, so it is very easy to understand that the preganglionic fibers, these are the preganglionic fibers are very long, and the ganglion is actually towards, or maybe closer towards, the organs. So these can go and supply different organs like the heart, the urinary bladder, etc. So this was regarding the parasympathetic system. So now coming to the sympathetic system, the sympathetic system is actually derived from the thoracolumbar outflow region, and it is easy to understand that the ganglions in the sympathetic nervous system are closer towards the central nervous system, and away from the postganglion fibers are actually longer, and then they can go towards the heart or for example the urinary bladder itself. So this is the blue one is the sympathetic nervous system, and it is derived from the thoracolumbar outflow. So what is the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic? What we have discussed here is that first we have to distinguish them between the anatomical classification. So the sympathetic is derived from the thoracolumbar outflow, and parasympathetic is actually the craniosacral outflow. And here the preganglionic fibers are smaller, and the postganglionic are obviously longer. And here the preganglionic fibers are longer, and postganglionic fibers are shorter or more towards the organs. So if you want to remember this, you have one thing to, we can use one thing, that when we have sympathy towards someone, we would like to keep them close to us. So actually the ganglions are closer to us in sympathetic system, and it's the opposite in the parasympathetic system. Okay, so what is a neurotransmitter? Neurotransmitters are chemical which are produced inside the neurons and are used for different functions, and can be transmitted from one neuron to another, or one neuron to another other receptors. Okay, so at these ganglions, these are all the ganglions, the preganglionic fibers of both sympathetic plus parasympathetic. At the preganglionic fibers, they secrete what? They secrete acetylcholine, and the preganglionic fibers are actually have the NN receptor. I'll come to this NN receptor later. So all the ganglions, be it the sympathetic or the parasympathetic, the preganglionic fibers actually secrete ACH, and all the ganglions have NN type of receptor. NN, this is a nicotinic receptor. Nerve, you can, by NN you can see nicotinic receptor. So be it the sympathetic system or be it the parasympathetic system, all of these, this, all of these will have what? ACH release from the preganglionic fibers and NN receptors at their ganglions. The difference comes between what happens at the postganglionic fibers. The postganglionic fibers, in case of the cholinergic system, they secrete in most cases, they secrete ACH. And in the sympathetic system, they secrete, in most cases, noradrenaline. But there are some exceptions here. In most cases, it is noradrenaline, but in some cases, like for example, the sympathetic supplied to the sweat glands, it actually secretes ACH. And also, dopamine is secreted in case of renal vasculature, renal and mesenteric vasculature. The postganglionic fibers in the sympathetic system, they secrete dopamine. And if you want to remember one more, adrenaline is secreted at the adrenal medulla. So what is the basic thing that we have to memorize? That in comparison to the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, here the preganglionic fibers are shorter, here they are longer, and the postganglionic fibers here mostly secrete noradrenaline with some exceptions, and here they secrete acetylcholine with some exceptions. The similarity between them is that the preganglionic fibers in both the cases, they secrete ACH, and the ganglions both have nicotinic receptors at them. So this is the basics what we should know about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. Now coming to the parasympathetic system, so the ACH, parasympathetic system, the ACH, how is it produced? We have to know about that. So this is a postsynaptic ganglion. This is a ganglion. This is a postganglionic fiber. And what happens is that here acetylcholine is stored, here ACH is stored, and it is released into the synaptic cleft. And we have a postganglionic area where there are receptors for acetylcholine. So we'll learn about these receptors later. These are actually of it can either be muscarinic or it can either be nicotinic types. We'll learn about them later. But first we have to discuss how acetylcholine is produced, how it is stored, and what are the drugs which inhibit. We have to know about the basic physiology, basically. So what happens? First, choline enters from outside to inside the neuron. So it goes through the axon, then it goes to the cyton, and it reaches this area. So this area. So what happens to choline? Choline, it attaches with acetylcholine, acetyl-CoA, and then CoA is given out. And then we have the formation of acetylcholine, then it enters the synaptic vesicle, and then it is released. And then this works on either the postsynaptic receptors, it can also work on presynaptic receptors, which in most cases act like brakes. Now what happens to ACH afterwards? It cannot keep on working forever, so it is actually metabolized. It is metabolized by what? It is metabolized by cholinesterases, acetylcholine esterase. So this acetylcholine esterase is present in abundance in all the synaptic clefts, and also we have something known as pseudocholinesterase, and or the other name is butyryl choline esterase, which are actually present in the plasma, which can also degrade them. We'll learn about the importance of this later. I'll tell you about the importance here only. So the question is, why can't ACH be used as a drug? Because no matter what, like if you give ACH intravenously, for example, you give ACH intravenously to skip the to increase the bioavailability to 100%, for example, still it will degrade down in about 10 to 30 seconds because of pseudocholinesterase. So now there are some drugs which can actually first of all, this step, the entry of choline, is actually the rate limiting step here. So there are some drugs which can actually increase the acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft, and there are some drugs which can decrease the amount of acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft. So one of the drugs that we have to learn about is hemicolinium. So hemicolinium, it actually inhibits the rate limiting step. It actually inhibits the rate limiting step, and you can remember it easily. Hemi means come or ada. So only ada or come choline is allowed to enter, and this will lead to less formation. The the second drug, which can actually, what it can do, it can inhibit the entry into the synapse, into the synaptic vesicle, is actually vesamicol. You can remember this drug. This drug actually inhibits the entry of the nascent acetylcholine inside the synaptic vesicle. You can remember this drug by speaking it in Hindi. Vesa means vesicle, me means में, choline. तो वेसिकल में कोलिन नहीं घुस पाएगा by the help of the drug vesamicol. Vesamicol is it does not allow the ACH to enter inside the synaptic vesicle. And then we have a very poisonous but very therapeutically good drug which inhibits this step, the release of ACH, and this is known as botulinum toxin. So Botox, which is used in very much used in plastic surgery. So we have first the hemicoleum, we have the vesamicol, and we have the Botox. So these drugs do not decrease the ACH levels in the synapse. Okay, so then we can also increase the level of ACH by inhibiting this enzyme. We can inhibit this enzyme. So we have drugs like physostigmine and neostigmine, which we'll learn about later. So let's study something about the receptors, the cholinergic receptors. So there are two types of receptors. First we have the nicotinic and we have the muscarinic. So nicotinic is of two types. We have NN receptors and we have NM receptors. It is very much important to know about where these receptors are located usually in the body. So the NN receptors are usually located at the ganglions. Both are the sympathetic plus parasympathetic. Both ganglions contain the NN receptors. Also, these are also present in the adrenal medulla. But these are not, it's not necessary to memorize this. Only remember that the ganglion contain NN receptors. Both sympathetic and parasympathetic contain these. So it's very important to remember that. So the NM receptors, as the name suggests, are present at the neuromuscular junction, nerve muscle junction, NMJs. Now the muscarinic receptors are of 5 types, but 3 are the basic ones which we have to know about: the M1, the M2, the M3, the M4, and the M5. M4 and M5 are not that important. Just remember that these are present in CNS. All of these are actually present in CNS. So these are all present in CNS. But if you want to remember something about the M4, M5, just remember that these are present in CNS. Now where are M1 receptors predominantly present? They are present in the ganglion of stomach, ganglion of GIT. So these are present in the ganglion of GIT. The M2 receptors are present in the heart, and the M3 receptors are present everywhere else. So it can be your bladder, it can be your bronchus, it can be your GIT. We have already listed CNS. It can be your glands, your sweat glands, your lacrimal glands. So these are the main areas, and obviously the eye, very important, the eye. These are the main areas where the M3 receptors are working. So now acetylcholine will come, and it will act on all these receptors. So what will it do? So we'll learn about the actions of acetylcholine, actions of ACH. So it is very easy to understand. First, let's see what happens in the heart. There is one golden rule to remember, that sympathetic system increases the activity of the heart and decreases everything else. And parasympathetic system does the opposite. So in the heart, we have what? The M2 receptor. And we have the M2 receptor. So what will acetylcholine do here, or what will the procholinergic drugs, or like the drugs, the parasympathetic mimetic drugs, what will they do in the heart? They will stimulate the M2 receptor, and they will lead to two things. They will lead to decrease in what? It will lead to decrease in conduction velocity, and it will lead to decrease in heart rate. So this is what you have to memorize. But there is a way to know what is the mechanism of action behind this. So they decrease conduction by increasing the AV nodal delay, and they decrease the heart rate by changing the slope of the fourth phase of the action potential. So in general, when acetylcholine acts on the M2 receptors, they acts on the stimulate M2 receptor, what will it lead to? Heart rate reduction and decrease in conduction. So we can just remember it leads to depression of the heart. Okay, so now coming to blood vessels. So वैसे तो the cholinergic system is not that important when considered with the blood vessels, but the blood vessels actually have what? The M3 receptors. And when these are stimulated, it will lead to a release of nitric oxide, and we know that nitric oxide are what? These are vasodilators. So vasodilation occurs. So this is the main thing that happens at the blood vessels. Now coming to the eye. Now in the eye, we have what? We have the M3 receptor again. Because just remember that M1 is present at the stomach, M2 is present at the heart, and M3 is present at everywhere else. Sorry. So in the eye, what will happen? It will lead to two things. First, it will act on the sphincter pupillae, and it will lead to what? Which is the circular muscle of the of the eye, circular muscle of the eye, and it will lead to what? Pinpoint pupil. Pinpoint pupil वैसे actually happens in poisoning cases, but we can say actually the main thing is meiosis here. That is this is the normal length, and now meiosis has taken place. Second thing that happens here is contraction of the ciliaris muscle. So when contraction of ciliaris muscle helps, if contraction of ciliaris muscle is done, it will lead to accommodation. So cholinergic system actually helps in accommodation of vision. So you can see if an anticholinergic drug is used, it will lead to what? Blurring of vision. If you put an anticholinergic drug here, anti-ACH drug here, then it will lead to blurring of vision, which is a very big problem. So we have discussed about the heart, there is depression of the heart. We have discussed about the blood vessel, vasodilation. In some conditions, vasoconstriction. If the endothelium is for example broken, this acetylcholine can actually go and stimulate the muscles here. We can stimulate the muscles here, and it will lead to vasoconstriction in very rare cases, but it's actually vasodilation in most cases. Depression of heart, vasodilation. In the eye, there is meiosis and accommodation process of accommodation. Now let's know about something about the glands. So at the glands, we have the M3 receptor, and what will it do? It will increase secretion of tears, the lacrimal fluid, the nasal fluid, the salivary discharge also increases, sweating also increases, etc. All of these increase. So it is easy to understand if a person is, for example, suffering from Sjögren's syndrome, or the Sika syndrome, I suppose. I think this is the name of the syndrome, Sika syndrome. So you can give a drug which actually acts on the gland to increase the salivary discharge. We'll come to that later. So M3 receptors are present here, and this will lead to increase in all the gland discharge. Okay, so what happens in the urinary bladder? Obviously here also there is M3 present, and it will lead to what? Contraction of the detrusor and relaxation of the trigone, which will lead to what? More urinary discharge, excess in urine outflow. Very easy to understand. And then at the GIT, here we have two types of receptors. We have the M1 and the M3. These are actually present in the ganglion. What will these two do? They will increase the secretion of HCl, which will predispose the person to peptic ulcer disease. And they will do what? They will increase the motility also, which will lead to what? Diarrhea. In excessive dose, obviously. Now coming to the bronchus. Here also we have the M3 receptor, very easy to understand. And what will it do? It will stimulate the muscle, it will contract the muscle, it will lead to bronchoconstriction. Now coming to the male sex organs. Here we know that the blood vessels are actually dilated due to the release of nitric oxide, and this will lead to erection of the penis. So in the end, we can understand that cholinergic system, it makes the heart unhappy, and it contracts everything, it stimulates every other thing. At others it's good, other places it's good. So the secretions will increase, the motility will increase, your stool outflow will increase, your urine will increase. In the heart, it will lead to hypotension, it will lead to bradycardia, and also it's easy to understand how the cholinergic system works. So these were regarding what happens in the receptors and what is the action of the choline, acetylcholine. Now coming to parasympathomimetic drugs. So as the name suggests, these drugs mimic what? Acetylcholine. These are actually these drugs do what actions? Similar to acetylcholine. We like all the actions that we discussed here, like on the heart, the blood vessel, the eye, glands, urinary bladder, GIT, male sex organs, and also the bronchus. So these can be of two types. These are actually of two types. These are directly acting and these are indirectly acting. So what is the mechanism of action of directly acting drugs? First we'll discuss this. The mechanism of action is that they directly stimulate what? The receptors. It can be either your nicotinic receptor or it can be muscarinic receptor. So what are the name of the drugs? So it is very easy to understand the first drug. It is very easy to understand the first drug being acetylcholine itself. So let's discuss about this here only. Okay, so why is acetylcholine not used as a drug? We have discussed that because it has a very short T half because of the butyryl choline esterases which break it down. Even when given by the IV route in 10 to 12 seconds, there will be no sufficient action that acetylcholine can do to your body. So it is not very useful therapeutically. So what were the drugs then made? What were the other drugs that were made? First, then we had the formation of what? Methacholine. Easy to understand. Methacholine has what? Methyl group, CH3 group. So there's a golden rule to remember. If your drug has methyl group, it will never act on the nicotinic receptor. It will only have what? Muscarinic property. So if your drug has methyl group, it will never act on the nicotinic receptor. It will only act on the muscarinic receptor. So what is the therapeutic value of methacholine? For what is it used? It is used something. It is used for something which is known as the methacholine challenge test. Methacholine challenge test. So a patient comes to you with symptoms of bronchial asthma, like presenting with dyspnea, and you are not able to confirm your diagnosis that it's bronchial asthma or it's a hyperactive bronchial epithelium. So what will you do? You'll tell him to inhale some methacholine, and if you see that his prognosis worsens, then you can confirm your diagnosis. The person has a hyperactive bronchus, or the person is maybe suffering from bronchial asthma. So diagnosis confirmation, you use what? Of what? Asthma, or actually better word is hypersensitive bronchus. You use what? Methacholine challenge test. Use the methacholine challenge test. Okay. No nicotinic action, only muscarinic action, and where are the bronchus present in the M3, to be precise. So this is the thing we have to remember, the methacholine challenge test. Okay. Now coming to the other drugs, we'll first discuss about the direct drugs only. So I'll discuss about the direct drugs here only. Okay. So other direct drugs are what? What is the other drug? We have bethanechol. CH हो गया bethanechol. So very easy to understand its action. You can remember it by the name itself. You see the first letter B. It acts on the bladder. It acts on the bowel. And what will it do? It will lead to more movement in the bowel. More easily the person get defecate. And in the bladder it will lead to increase urine. Increase movement, increase secretion, increase urine. So in what conditions will you need these two things? Very easy to understand. If a person has just been admitted in the surgical department and he has undergone a surgery, so post-operatively he can have either an atonic bladder, or he can either have an atonic ileus, or both, obviously atonic ileus. So you can give the person bethanechol. It's a wonderful drug to give the person in case of post-operative atonic bladder and atonic ileus. The problem is, if a person, an old man, comes to you with atonic bladder or maybe atonic ileus, and you haven't confirmed the diagnosis that there is no obstruction present. For example, if obstruction is present, for example a tumor or benign hyperplasia of prostate, what will happen? It will when you give bethanechol, it will lead to contraction of the muscles, and it can lead to rupture, and it can lead to severe pain. So that will be a very big problem for you. So in cases of obstruction, contraindication, please contraindicate bethanechol. You have to confirm your diagnosis first that there is no obstruction present. Then you have to give what? For bladder and bowel, give bethanechol. Okay, now coming to the last two drugs. We have one drug known as carbachol. So carbachol, obviously as the name suggests, it contains what? Carbamate group in it, and by its chemistry we also know it contains what? It contains the carbamate group. So it is a very long acting drug, because acetylcholine esterases take longer time to cut down carbamate group. So it is very long acting, but pharmacologically it is not very useful. Carbachol has no uses, but as it does not contain the methyl group, no methyl present, so it can actually act on the nicotinic receptors itself, but still there is no sufficient therapeutic value to this drug. Now coming to pilocarpine, very important drug, pilocarpine. So pilocarpine, it has two main functions. You can remember from the name P, it acts on the pupil, and it is useful in what? Open and closed angle glaucoma. And for acute cases of open angle glaucoma, it is a wonderful drug. So we have already discussed what will happen. It will lead to Uh, there are the different pathogenesis of the open and closed glaucoma. In open glaucoma, there is actually a problem in the trabecular meshwork, and in the closed glaucoma, there is actually a problem with the ciliaris muscle. So it will help in both these conditions, the pilocarpine. Also, it is used as a silogolic agent, so it increases saliva. And so, for what patient will you use this thing? For increasing saliva, for increasing lacrimal secretion. So, there are two types of people for which you can give pilocarpine. Pilocarpine. First, unfortunately, the person had a head and neck tumor, and he experienced for head and neck radiation, which destroyed some of his glands, the parotid gland, etc. So you can give pilocarpine, and it will act on the residual glands, and it will lead to cure of dry mouth. So it will help to overcome dry mouth. And also, in cases of Sika syndrome or the Sjögren syndrome, Sika or the Sjögren syndrome, you can use this pilocarpine to increase your secretion. In Sjögren syndrome, what happens? We have xerostomia. So it is a cure for xerostomia. Not a cure, but actually helps with xerostomia. So now coming to the indirectly drugs. So we have discussed what drugs here. First, let's revise this. First, we have discussed the acetylcholine, not a very useful drug. Methacholine has methyl group, so therefore no nicotinic property, only muscarinic property. We use it for the methacholine challenge test. Methacholine challenge test, you tell the person to inhale. If progression worsens, you have confirmed your diagnosis of asthma or hypersensitive bronchus. If you have bethanechol, bowel, bladder increases both the things, atonic bladder, atonic ileus, post-operative, or in normal cases also. Carbachol, no therapeutic value. Pilocarpine, very much therapeutic, or excellent drug for open angle glaucoma and closed angle glaucoma, both of them acute cases of open angle glaucoma, and for increasing saliva or actually reversing xerostomia in Sika syndrome or due to head and neck radiation. So we have completed all the direct drugs. Now coming to indirect drugs. So how do the indirect drugs work? How do the indirect drugs work? So these actually, we had one enzyme, the acetylcholine esterase, which was actually metabolizing the ACH and metabolizing ACH. So if we actually inhibit this, then we can increase the duration of action of ACH pharmacologically, sorry. So there are scientists found about 3 types of drugs. So one type of drug bound loosely to this enzyme due to what? Its alcohol group, the OH group. The name of the drug is edrophonium. So for it is a reversible drug because it bound very loosely to the ACHE enzyme. So after some time, it is a very short acting drug due to its OH binding. Now, so some drugs were found to be making covalent bonds, but labile covalent bonds like neostigmine, physostigmine, etc. So these were very much useful in different conditions for increasing the ACH activity, and these are known as the drugs which form labile covalent bonds are actually neostigmine, physostigmine, your tacrine, donepezil, rivastigmine, galantamine, etc. These are the reversible drugs. The reversible inhibitors. This is also a reversible inhibitor, very short acting though. Now there are some drugs which bound very tightly to the receptor, and they had a type of a lid over them. Which actually contained what? An alkyl group. So these drugs were actually forming very stable covalent bonds, covalent bonds. So so these were forming very stable covalent bonds and very so this lead to very prolonged action of ACH and actually leads to toxicity of ACH. The problem with this is for the first 30 minutes this alkyl group is actually very much present on top of this. So if something comes and attaches to this alkyl group, so this lid, the whole lid can be removed from it. But after 30 minutes, this alkyl group vanishes. So it permanently binds to the enzyme and it leads to irreversible binding, and this process is known as aging. So for example, a person has taken something like organophosphorus. The person is suffering from organophosphorus poisoning. So this thing will come and attach to it, and if the antidote is like that is atropine is not given under 30 minutes, it will lead to aging of the enzyme and it will lead to very stable covalent bond formation, and it will be irreversibly bound to it. Irreversibly enzyme inhibition will take place and the patient will die. So depending on this, the strength of the covalent bonds, we can divide the irreversible drugs into what the indirectly acting drugs into reversible inhibitors and irreversible inhibitors. So the reversible inhibitors can either be divided into lipid soluble or water soluble. So why do we need to know about lipid soluble? If a drug is lipid soluble, so what will happen? It will easily cross the blood-brain barrier. It will easily cross the corneal membrane. It will easily cross the GIT. So if we have a problem in these areas, we'll give a lipid soluble drug. But if you have a water soluble drug, so what will happen? It won't be able to cross all these areas, and it will basically act where its peripheral action will be better than its central action, like in the blood-brain barrier. So what are the lipid soluble drugs that we have in market? We have the physostigmine. We have the tacrine. We have rivastigmine. We have galantamine, and we have one more drug. One more drug. I'm sorry, I forgot about it. Donepezil. So these are the lipid soluble drugs, and what are the water soluble drugs? We have neostigmine. We have peridostigmine, and we have edrophonium. Very easy to understand. Let's discuss first about edrophonium. So we know that edrophonium, it contains what? Hydroxyl group. So it is obviously polar, that's why it's water soluble. And the only indication for edrophonium is actually one thing which is known as the Tensilon test. Now, what is the Tensilon test? It is very essential to understand that if acetylcholine is present in optimum levels at the nerve muscle junction, then contraction and relaxation takes properly in the muscle. Basically contracts, but the normal working requires normal optimum levels of acetylcholine in the body. If you have decreased ACH or if you have increased ACH, so what will happen? Both of these will lead to weakness of muscle. Now patient comes to you with weakness of muscle, and it can be either due to decrease or increase of ACH. Decreased ACH takes place in what? Myasthenia gravis. And increase takes place in the problem of cholinergic crisis. So how to distinguish between these two conditions, how to confirm a diagnosis? So give the patient 1 to 2 milligram edrophonium. So if his weakness stops, it will basically act for 10 to 15 minutes. If weakness stops, then the myasthenia gravis is confirmed. If it worsens, then cholinergic crisis is confirmed. So tensilon test deals with what? The confirmatory diagnosis of myasthenia gravis. And what do you use here? Edrophonium. So we have discussed about edrophonium here. Now coming to neostigmine and pyridostigmine. Neostigmine first, and pyridostigmine. So neostigmine is actually a quaternary amine. So due to this thing, it is actually very much polar. So it is very less lipid soluble. So it cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. It cannot cross the corneal membrane, and it also has very less GI absorption. So first thing is you have to give these drugs IV, by IV. Second thing. So where would you like to use these things? You cannot use them centrally, so you have to use them periphery. And what are the conditions where muscle weakness happens? For example, myasthenia gravis, antibody formation takes place against the ACH receptors. So if you want to increase the ACH levels in these people, you give neostigmine or pyridostigmine, which will go and inhibit what the esterases. It will decrease the esterase and increase acetylcholine in your body. So these are used for myasthenia gravis. Pyridostigmine is longer acting, so it is beneficial here. But what is the problem with only using neostigmine and pyridostigmine alone? The problem is this: it will lead to blockage of ACH, and in the myasthenia gravis, what you need to essentially increase the activity of what are the antibodies formed against? They are formed against the NM receptors. But when you decrease the ACHE, when you decrease it by using neostigmine and pyridostigmine, so your ACH will increase and it will act on the NM receptors. Also, it will act on the M1, M2, M3 also, and this will lead to side effects. So we have to use a drug which actually blocks M1, M2, M3, etc. all the receptors also. So for this, for myasthenia gravis, you have to use what? Atropine in combination with either neostigmine or pyridostigmine to block what? The side effects. And neostigmine, pyridostigmine, what? To increase the ACH. So this is the first indication of neostigmine and pyridostigmine. Second indication, cobra bite. Cobra bite also affects what? The nerve muscle junction, NMJ. So give what? Neostigmine plus the pyridostigmine. Plus you have to give atropine in this condition also to prevent the side effects. Also, in other cases like for example, post-operative bladder problems, like we discussed the indications of Bethanychol and obstructive bowels, the atonic conditions. You can give neostigmine in these conditions, because these will wonderfully act in the peripheral circulation. Also, after surgery, during surgery, we normally give muscle relaxants to the person. But for example, if the surgery ends earlier than expected, the muscle relaxants will keep on working. So in cases when you have given competitive muscle relaxants, you can give neostigmine or pyridostigmine, and it can reverse the action of muscle relaxants. But there is no need to give atropine in this condition. No. You actually have to give atropine in this condition. In this case of bladder and bowel, you do not need to give atropine. You do not need to give atropine, because the side effects will actually help the person. It will actually help the person if you activate M1, M2, M3, M1. M1 will lead to more peristalsis, and M3 will lead to what? Contraction of the urinary bladder. So these are actually helpful. So there is no need to give atropine in this condition. But in this condition of muscle relaxant use, or in case of cobra bite, or in case of myasthenia gravis, you don't want the extra side effects. The only main problem in cobra bite, in myasthenia gravis, and in use of muscle relaxants, the main problem is with your nerve muscle junction. So there is a need to give atropine to prevent what? Side effects. Atropine acts on the M1, M2, M3 receptor, muscarinic receptor blocker. So we have discussed about pyridostigmine and neostigmine. Also, pyridostigmine is longer acting than neostigmine. Now we'll come to physostigmine, tacrine, rivastigmine, and galantamine. So coming to physostigmine first. So we have discussed it's lipid soluble. It is lipid soluble, and it is a polar drug, obviously. Non-polar drug, obviously. Non-polar drug. So it can act both periphery, like 50% of it will act on the periphery and 50% of it will cross the blood-brain barrier, and it will do its work job there. So let's suppose in our normal brain there is a Meyners nucleus which contains all the ACH inside it, all the cholinergic inside it, all the cholinergic cholinergic bodies inside it, in the Meyners nucleus, and this is required for memory. Now, as the age progresses, this all gets reduced, and it can lead to what? Senile dementia, or the other name is Alzheimer's dementia. So we need a drug which can cross the blood-brain barrier. So it should be lipid soluble, and it can act here and increase the ACH here. So scientists thought of giving physostigmine. But the problem with physostigmine is that 50% of it will also act peripherally, and it will lead to a lot of side effects. And then scientists discovered that physostigmine is not given in dementia, senile dementia, or Alzheimer's dementia. So they developed a new drug, tacrine. Tacrine has 100% entry into the brain, and it worked wonderfully. So for a long time, it was the drug of choice for senile dementia or the Alzheimer's dementia. But nowadays, it is not the drug of choice because due to its side effects. First, it is very short acting. Second, it is hepatotoxic. So scientists thought of producing a new drug. So physostigmine did not work. We never used it for senile dementia. Then tacrine worked wonderfully, but it was a drug of choice for a long period of years. But due to short action and hepatotoxicity, it is now taken off market. Now the drugs that we use for senile dementia are your dolapazine, your rivastigmine, and you have tacrine. Rivastigmine, donepezil, and galantamine. These are actually longer acting drugs, and these are the drug of choice for senile dementia or Alzheimer's dementia. Okay, so we have discussed about all the reversible drugs here. We have discussed everything about the reversible drugs here. Let me see if I missed something. Okay, so let's study something. This was regarding the Alzheimer's disease. So regarding physostigmine, you can remember from the word P, it is also used in the pupil. So it is also useful for glaucoma. So two drugs which start from P, pilocarpine and physostigmine, are usually used in the use of glaucoma. So these are all the thing that you have to remember. One more thing, very important thing, is that in cases of atropine poisoning, atropine will lead to what? M1, M2, muscarinic blockade. Basically, it will lead to M3 blockade. So the person will go into person will have anticholinergic effects like blurring of vision, retention of urine, etc. To increase ACH, then you have to give what? Physostigmine. Physostigmine is a beautiful drug. It is actually the drug of choice in case of atropine poisoning. It is a drug of choice in cases of atropine poisoning because it acts both peripherally and it acts on the central nervous system also. So this is all regarding the reversible blockers of ACHE. Now coming to the irreversible blockers. Now we discussed that irreversible blockers they show the process of aging. So these are not therapeutically used. These are actually usually come as in poisoning cases. So there is one drug. I'll just write all the names of the drugs of irreversible poisons, the irreversible drugs, irreversible inhibitors. We have the organophosphates and we have the carbamates. So in the organophosphates, we have malathion, we have parathion, we have TIC20, we have what? We have Soman, Trabun, etc. These are actually the nerve gases. Serine. These are the nerve gases. And malathion, parathion, and TIC20 are what? Your pesticides. And regarding the carbamates, I have remembered only two: carbaryl, and propoxyl, propoxer. So malathion, parathion, and TIC20, Soman, like Somansh, Tabun and Serine, and carbaryl and propoxer are your irreversible inhibitors. So what will these do after? They will form very strong covalent bonds. This will lead to what? Increase in ACH. A lot of acetylcholine functions will work. So these all will lead to what? This will lead to blurring of vision. Sorry. These will lead to our hypercholinergic activity. It will lead to more urine, more defecation. It will lead to more secretions. It will lead to acidity. It will lead to pinpoint pupil. Pinpoint pupil is actually also seen in cases of opioid poisoning. But if a patient comes with increased secretions and pinpoint pupil, your diagnosis should always be atropine poisoning. The OP poisoning or carbamate poisoning. OP poisoning in most cases. And also there can either be problems like bradycardia or hypotension. But in very rare cases, it can either lead to hypertension and tachycardia also in some cases, because we have discussed earlier that ACH in high doses, it actually acts on the NN receptors also, and it will lead to sympathetic stimulation also. It can lead to increased heart rate and tachycardia also. But it's very rare because you need a lot of acetylcholine in your body to do this exogenously. So in most cases, you will suffer from bradycardia, hypertension. Your person will have a lot of secretions, and there will be pinpoint pupil, acidity, defecation, more urine output. So this is what irreversible inhibitors do to the person. Now, so what is the treatment? So in the first 30 minutes, you have to treat the person irreversible. In cases of irreversible poisons like organophosphates and organocarbamates, the main drug of choice is actually atropine. So now due to these two things, what we have increased ACH in the body. So let's do one thing. We will give atropine. It will block the M1, M2 and M3 receptors. And we know that ACH normally acts on this only. For action on the action on the nerve junction, it leads very high, very high quantity, so it does not normally do so. And for NM, we'll look at another drug. We'll look at another drug for this. For first, you have to give atropine, which will block the M1, M2 and M3 receptor. It will save the patient's life. It's done between 30 minutes, because afterwards aging will take place and it's very difficult to save the patient. Okay, so atropine will block these. So other drugs which are used against these are actually your the oximes. So we have two types of oximes. We actually have the pralidoxime, and we have the diacetyl monoxime. This is longer acting, by the way. Okay, so we have the pralidoxime and we have the diacetyl monoxime. What will these are used in cases of these are used along with atropine to cure this thing, the nerve muscle weakening, the weakening that will take place. We have discussed that increased ACH also causes weakening of the muscles. Also, they will help in respiratory depression problems. So these are the oximes. So how do the oximes work? Actually, if you look at the receptor, if you look at the enzyme, the acetylcholine esterase, so it has we have the anionic site here. We have one anionic site and when we have esteric site. So your organophosphates, your organophosphates will come and attach here. So to reverse their action, we give oximes. Come and attach here, and they form a very strong bond, and it will lead to removal of organophosphorus. So organophosphates like your tabun, serine, and your other things like parathion, malathion. So it will lead to removal of organophosphates. So this will actually increase the increase the activity of the enzyme, and these are therefore oximes are also known as enzyme reactivators, to be very precise. But in cases of carbomates, I'll just draw another. In cases of carbomates, your carbomates come and attach. It's a very big molecule, so it will come and attach to both the esteric site and the anionic site, and therefore your oxime can't do anything. Therefore, the oximes are useful only in OP poisoning cases, not carbamate poisoning cases. So